All right, so we're diving deep today into a pretty provocative novel. It's
Mm.
called How to Make Love to a Negro Without Getting Tired.
Yeah, that title definitely grabs your attention, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that's part of the point, right? It was written by Dany Laferrière, it's translated by David Hommel, and the setting is Montreal.
A fascinating backdrop for sure.
It is. And our mission, I think, with this deep dive is to unpack the novel's take on a whole bunch of things. Race, sexuality, identity. I mean, it's all kind of wrapped up in this satirical package.
And it is very much satire. We should make that clear right from the start. This isn't a literal how-to guide, though the title might lead you to believe that. It's really exploring the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves about those very things, race, sexuality, identity.
Okay, so right out the bat, that title,
Mm.
it's deliberately provocative when you say it's kind of promising something maybe a little salacious.
It is, and it immediately sets you up to be challenged. It's Ferrier's way of saying, hey, are you ready to confront some uncomfortable truths? Because that's what this book does. It uses humor as a tool to really highlight these deep-seated societal norms and stereotypes, especially around race.
Yeah. And speaking of uncomfortable truths, let's talk about the narrator. He's at the center of this whole thing. He's a young Haitian immigrant in Montreal. He's trying to seduce white women, and he's writing a novel about it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on there.
There is, and there's a real complexity to his motivations. You get the sense that he's both playing a role, kind of consciously embodying these stereotypes, while also being acutely aware of how those stereotypes are shaping his interactions. He often addresses the reader directly, almost with a wink and a nod, saying, look, see how this works.
It's like he's this trickster figure, you know?
Yeah.
He's using that perceived exoticism, that otherness, to his advantage. And his voice, the way he narrates the story, it's so brash, so confident. It's almost like he's daring you to judge him.
And that forces you to confront your own reactions, right? It's brilliant in that way. And Laferriere's style, the way he writes, really amplifies that effect.
So talk to us about the style. What are we looking at here?
Well, it's a very fragmented style. Stream of consciousness. We're right inside the narrator's head, getting all his thoughts on filter as they jump around. One minute it's a witty observation about life in Montreal. The next, it's a philosophical musing on the nature of desire. And then suddenly we're in an explicit sexual encounter.
Yeah, you never quite know what's coming next. And the language itself is so playful, so ironic. It's like he's constantly blurring the lines between reality and performance, and maybe even where Laferrière himself stands on all this.
Right, and that ambiguity is very intentional. Which brings us to the novel's exploration of race. It doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions. Instead, it dives headfirst into the messiness, the contradictions of racial dynamics.
The narrator's relationships with these women, they can feel exploitative at times, and yet they also reveal these deeper anxieties, these desires that are bound up in these interracial encounters. There's a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely, and that's where the power of satire comes in. It allows Laferrière to expose those complexities, to make us question the assumptions we often bring to these kinds of interactions.
So you've mentioned the humor, the satire, but is it always effective? Are there moments where it maybe falls flat or feels, I don't know, too provocative?
That's a good question. I think the humor is incredibly effective in terms of provoking a reaction. It gets under your skin and forces you to think. But there's no doubt that the explicit sexual content, the narrator's sometimes cynical worldview, can be off-putting to some readers. Laferrière is deliberately challenging boundaries here. He's not afraid to offend.
And that discomfort, I think, is part of the point, right? I mean, going back to our mission here, the takeaway isn't so much about how to literally do anything. It's about understanding the why. Why do we tell these stories about race and sexuality? What are the uncomfortable truths beneath those narratives?
Exactly. Laferrière is forcing us to look at those uncomfortable truths, and to do so with a sense of humor, even if that humor is sometimes dark and unsettling.
So to wrap up, it sounds like How to Make Love to a Negro Without Getting Tired is a pretty powerful, even controversial work of satire. Through this complex character and this very unique style, Laferrière is really challenging us to examine our assumptions about race, about sexuality, and about how those things intersect.
I think that's a great summary. It's a book that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. It's a book that makes you think.
And that leads us to a final thought for our listeners. Think about the societal expectations, the stereotypes that we all carry around with us, even if we don't realize it. How do those expectations, those stereotypes, shape the way we understand ourselves, the way we understand our relationships with others? And how can engaging with challenging works, like this one, help us to unpack those assumptions, to see the world and ourselves in a new light?
I think that's a question worth pondering. It's something we can all benefit from considering.